So my name is Tom Sgouros. I'm from Rhode Island, and I contributed to the chapter called "Feasting on the Public Commons," about the financialization and the privatization of public goods, and about predatory public finance.
What has Wall Street done to our municipal governments?
Well, they've treated them as mines, as mines from which to take what they can, and it takes a bunch of different forms. I mean, sometimes it's pretty simple, just stealing, padding bond sales, or flipping bonds to increase the number of commissions that are sold, and sometimes it's a little more subtle, where the bank fixes it so the bondholder actually has a claim on tax revenue, or sometimes it's even more subtle than that, where through financialization the private interests wind up owning what ought to be a public good. In the city of Chicago, they sold all the rights to the parking revenue to a private corporation, and now they can't have parades and street festivals anymore, because if they want to have a parade, they owe the parking vendor money for all the parking spaces that can't be used that day.
Can you give me some examples of the extreme theft, I should call it, right? That is happening. How did GE Capital steal from the municipalities?
Well, that was a relatively simple and straightforward kind of thing, where they were just talking about rigging prices, and the prices that they rigged, the commissions on investment funds. The commissions were, they seem small, but the volume of money that goes through them is so large that even a half a basis point, right, that's a basis point is 1/100%. Even a half a basis point is a lot of money when you're talking about billions of dollars flowing through. But there's other stuff that is out there that's as egregious and as infuriating. The city of San Diego a few years ago borrowed $105 million on a kind of a bond that is going to cost them $877 million in interest by the time they're done paying for it. I mean, that kind of thing is outrageous.
And what about J.P. Morgan? What did they do to Jefferson County?
Oh, well, that was. You have to laugh, or risk crying. J.P. Morgan, they came into Jefferson County and they said, we have a way to help you finance some improvements to the infrastructure in Jefferson County. And when that turned out to be maybe a little bit more than Jefferson County could afford, they very helpfully offered to refinance it, and then they offered to refinance it again, and each time Jefferson County was getting further behind. It's just like a customer at a payday lending store who can't ever seem to pay off the original loan and just keeps turning it over and keeps getting further and further into debt. And Jefferson County, J.P. Morgan, even they paid Goldman Sachs $3 million to stay out of Jefferson County, so that they could have it to themselves, because they had such a great thing going there. And now Jefferson County is utterly bankrupt, indebted for hundreds of million dollars of bondholders, and I mean, Jefferson County just does not have the resources to pay off that kind of stuff.
So basically, Wall Street is enslaving our local governments, in a sense. How widespread is the problem of Wall Street's relationships with those local governments?
Oh, it's pervasive. I mean, there is very little in the way of fiduciary duty that a bank owes its customers. I mean, basically, they are supposed to give you your money back when you ask for it, but that's about it. And the banks have really gone to town where they can. Now, a lot of times they've been abetted by mayors and legislators who are more interested in the short term than the long term. But like that deal with San Diego, the mayor of San Diego was fully aware that that's what was happening, but he didn't care, since the first debt payments don't happen for 20 years. He'll be dead by the time it's a disaster for them.
And in your book, you said something about Philadelphia was involved in an interest rate swap.
Yeah,
Can you explain that?
Okay, so the city of Philadelphia had a bad bond rating, and so and so all they could really get was a variable rate bond. When they went to borrow money, they could get a variable rate bond. A bunch of banks had fixed rate debt, and they offered to swap it. They said, in Philadelphia, you pay our debt service payments, and we'll pay your debt service payments. And they gave Philadelphia some money to do that. And so it's like a little exchange of risk, except that the difference is that once the risk was exchanged, Philadelphia was essentially still had some risk, but it was the opposite kind of risk. Philadelphia now feared interest rates going down, whereas before they had feared interest rates going up. The banks, on the other hand, because they were actually funding variable rate investments with this variable rate loans, they actually extinguished their risk. So for them, Philadelphia now feared bond rates going down, and the banks didn't care which way they went. So what happened is that in 2008, interest rates went rock bottom, went all the way down, and so the money that the banks were paying Philadelphia went to almost zero, whereas the money that Philadelphia was paying on the bank's debt stayed very, very high. And so it was the city of Philadelphia and the school department in Philadelphia. So this year, the school department had to lay off about 3,000 people, and there's pretty much nobody in the Philadelphia school department who isn't a teacher. That means no nurses, no aides, no assistant principals, few enough janitors, and it's basically all from this exchange of risk. Philadelphia thought it was going to be a good deal for them, but they were really wrong.
So basically, they made a bad bet, you could say, but then something happened. Was the crisis?
Well, remember, it's not just that they exchange risk, right? When the swap was done, the Philadelphia had a different kind of risk than they had before, and the banks had no risk at all.
Right.
And so it's not really fair to say that it was a deal that benefited them both, because it benefited the banks in a big way, and it benefited Philadelphia maybe only a little bit. And in the end, it didn't benefit Philadelphia at all. The analogy that I make is that hedging risk is like you're on a cruise, right? And some banker offers to exchange his cabin for yours because yours is closer to the lifeboats. Right? That's hedging risk. But the hedging risk has nothing to do with what happens after the boat sinks. So now the boat sinks, so the banker's in the lifeboat, and and there you are, you're swimming over to the lifeboat. What happens? Does the banker say, "Oh, a deal's a deal," and pushes you away from the boat? Right? That's not, that's horrifying. That's not hedging risk. And so what happened in Philadelphia is roughly like that. A hedge was there, and okay, the hedge was mutually beneficial. But then when the disaster happened, for the banks to just insist that a deal's a deal and they can't do anything to help, that's appalling.
Well, it's appalling, but it's still legal, unless they could have.
The thing that you learn when you do public policy research, that's my stock and trade. You learn that really all of the most appalling stuff is legal. That itself is pretty appalling, but all of the most egregious abuses, they're all perfectly legal. They're all these signed documents. What's that? Wasn't it the Woody Guthrie song about somebody can steal more with a pen than somebody else can with a gun? I'm getting that wrong, but that's the idea, and it's really true.
But the fraud would have been if they could have kind of foreseen that there was a crisis coming.
Well, fraud is a crime, right? And I'm talking about things that are not actually fraud. They're just astonishing abuses there's astonishing abuses of morality and common sense. They're the kinds of things that should get you shunned in polite society, but they don't.
Why are these local governments and the school districts dealing with financial institutions anyways? Why would they do that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that they have all been underfunded for years. They are all on starvation diets. In Philadelphia, the school department is actually financed by state contributions. The state took it over some years ago, and the state is being run by right-wing Republicans who think that any dime spent on Philadelphia school children is a dime wasted.
Let's talk about public space. In what ways is Wall Street taking over public space?
Well, I mean, there's public space in the sort of concrete sense of like a park or something like that. I'm not sure that's happening any more than other things. But there is a place where public goods are being taken over, and here's a financial example. There's something called a TIF, tax increment financing, and the idea is that with a TIF is that it's a kind of a bond, but the bond is going to be repaid by the increase in taxes that are available from the development or the project that happens there. Now, suppose you have a project that is some mall or something like that, and the city might finance with a TIF bond. It might finance some traffic improvements, or a parking lot or something like that, on behalf of the commercial developer. Now, what's happened when you do that is you've given the commercial developer, because the improvements that the city makes are sort of on behalf of the commercial developer, you've given that commercial developer a legal claim on tax revenue that might have once been thought to belong to the common good, be used to fund public schools or be used to fund the police department. But instead, it's being used to fund some kind of traffic improvement for that mall. In Rhode Island, there's a mall in downtown Providence, the Providence Place Mall, that is in year 18 or 19 of being funded by sales tax. So if you go into that mall and you buy something that it has a sales tax on it, that sales tax never makes it to the state. That sales tax is collected by the mall operators and used to pay off bonds that were issued on their behalf by the state. Right, so that sales tax is no longer going to fund the government, no longer going to fund the things that are important to all of us. It's going to fund the mall. And that's a place where where we've like privatized what used to be obviously public goods.
What about like a park? And then I'm thinking mostly of Zuccotti Park. That's a private public space, or what is that?
My understanding is that it's a private space that is sort of deeded to the public, but it winds up with a private owner able to say what happens in the park or not.
Do you know why they couldn't
I don't know that much about
okay.
Zuccotti Park. I contributed to the Chapter 6, but I didn't write.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Where does democracy fit in when everything becomes privatized?
That's the big question. I mean, when we have signed over things that, like I said, when we've signed over tax revenue, when we've signed over utilities, when we've signed over things as basic as parking spaces on the city streets, we've signed over pieces of city streets. When we've signed these all over to public companies, to private companies, and we've done it with these enforceable legal agreements, then essentially what you've done is you have delegated what used to be thought of as part of the polity to a private company. You've just given it away, and that is not democratic. That is just the opposite.
The way the financial system works, like talking about like how it creates money, how does that relate to the privatization of the commons?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that.
Well, in the chapter you were talking about, or your partner was talking about the EMOs.
The bunch of us who wrote it, yes.
How many wrote that chapter?
I couldn't tell you.
Really?
No.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I want to talk about the educational management organization. That was very intriguing. The EMOs.
Right. So people are suspicious of. People are rightfully suspicious, I think, of for-profit companies. So a lot of charter schools that happen, they are actually nonprofits. So the charter school is actually a nonprofit, so that people can say, "Oh, no, it's okay. It's a nonprofit." Well, yeah, maybe it is, but the charter school itself is being run by an educational management organization, which turns out to be a for-profit company, and that's a way. That's sort of a sneaky way that they have privatized quite a lot of public education, and not only privatized it, but privatized it for profit. That you have these financiers thinking of school districts as a profit center, and that's that's astonishing.
But what is that an educational management organization? What is that?
It's the guts of the school. It's the organization that hires and fires the teachers, and it's the principal and the school leadership, but all being run in service of this private corporation behind it.
Right, and then there's K-12 education. What is that?
I mean K to 12. That's just. I'm not sure what you mean. Kindergarten to.
Is that? Oh, I'm from Belgium. I don't know.
It just means the public schools.
Oh,
Yeah.
it just means the couple. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten, 12th grade.
To 12th
Oh,
grade.
okay. And there were the EMOs got their hands all over those.
Right. That's what the charter schools are all about, the privatization of public elementary and middle and high schools. And the EMOs are a component of that push. I mean, you have all this money that's out there, money that is funding the education reform movement that is basically about sort of hollowing out public education, turning, to the extent that it can, turning public education into into job readiness programs, but also making certain that the public education system remains a place where private financiers can earn a profit from investment. And we're not talking about investment in something as basic as like a textbook or a service that the schools can use. We're talking about investing. We're talking about essentially a takeover of public education. They're actually doing the management of the public schools. They're paying the teachers. They're hiring the teachers, and that's you could call it a leveraged buyout of public education if you wanted to, and you wouldn't be so far off from the actual reality of it.
There was a couple of famous names that I came across in the book in relation to these schools and EMOs, and those are like Magic Johnson and Andre Agassi. Do you know anything about their involvement and how that?
Oh no, that was no, I mean that's related. Those guys were fronting for some financiers who were involved in other kinds of investments, but it wasn't to my knowledge directly involved in education things. It was the same financiers behind them, though.
I see. Now, is there a correlation between the growth of the financial sector and the rate of increase of the privatization and securitization of the commons?
Well, yeah, I think that there probably is, because the kinds of things that we're talking about are a source of tremendous profit for the financial industry. And to the extent that they find a source of tremendous profit, they make a lot of money and solidify the power that they have over the public debate and over the mechanics of how state and local government is run. And with that power, they wind up opening up new doors to more profit and sort of accumulating more and more power over us. So I think they're, they feed off each other. The more profitable the more profitable predatory public finance gets, the more opportunities for predatory public finance arise.
Another one that we haven't talked about is the private prisons that are emerging everywhere.
Yeah, they are. They are in Central Falls, Rhode Island. which we mentioned before. There's a private prison there, and Central Falls was recently went through a bankruptcy, and all through the bankruptcy, the one group of people who could not be touched in bankruptcy was the bondholders for Central Falls and the bondholders for the private prison that is in Central Falls. The prison has defaulted on its payments to the city of Central Falls years ago. Hasn't made those payments for quite a long time, but yet not a single bondholder has lost a dime on any of that on any of the bonds that they invested in Central Falls. The prison there has been nothing but a black eye and a source of pain and anguish for the city, when in fact it was sold originally as a boon. It was going to be jobs and it was going to be investment and construction in the city, and it has been nothing of the kind.
So they say when they built these prisons, they're going to need people to inhabit those prisons. They're going to need prisoners.
Yeah. Yes, I mean the one in Central Falls was built. They had a contract from the Immigration and Naturalization Service, so they wound up holding INS prisoners. And here's the thing: if you're trying to make a profit on a prison, well, what aren't you going to buy? You're not going to buy more prison guards than you actually need. You're not going to buy prison medics. You're not going to buy medical staff. You're not going to buy good food. You're not going to, and so what happened is that you had a lot of people who were getting really bad medical treatment. You got a lot of people who were getting malnourished, and then you had a prisoner die from lack of medical treatment. The INS finally wised up and said, "Oh, maybe we shouldn't be putting our prisoners here in Central Falls," and they took them away. And that's when the prison started to default on its payments to the city.
Do you know how many private prisons exist now in the United States? Do you have an idea of that?
No, not off the top of my head. I can't remember. Listen, one is an appalling number, and there's thousands. I don't know how many there are.
Yeah, I guess they also recruit through the war of drugs, right? The war on drugs.
Well, there is this problem that nature abhors a vacuum, and apparently judges and people with a prison to fill find ways to fill it, but it's a little hard to say how that actually works.
Lobbyists. You need lobbyists to make everything legal. What do they usually push for?
Well, whatever they can. I mean, the lobbyist is there to help if you're talking about like one of these deals, the lobbyist is there to defend the deal. They're not necessarily there to defend the public or to defend the public's interest. Their job is they are there to make sure that the bank or the private corporation that is getting involved is able to make the money that they think they ought to make.
Can we talk about Citizens United and the super PACs?
We can. Election finance is a little bit is not entirely my thing, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Citizens United was at the bottom line. A lot of these laws are being deformed. A lot of these deals are being made for the benefit of private corporations, not the public. Now, the problem is that the Supreme Court has decided that private corporations are equivalent to the public, and the Citizens United was sort of a decision where they said, yeah, money, speech, it's the same thing, and that I think sort of made it even easier for that sort of vicious feedback loop to work. The feedback loop that says that the more profitable the public finance is, the more powerful the public financiers are, and lobbyists and Citizens United. Those are the ways in which those entities maintain their power.
And there's also ALEC. What is ALEC?
Oh, ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's basically a right wing. They're a legislation shop. You know that a lot of legislatures, legislators don't have a ton of money. They don't have a ton of expertise. They don't have a ton of time, and so some of the progress of this stuff is actually stymied by the fact that people don't have enough time to write terrible legislation. But that's okay, because ALEC has stepped in to help everybody write terrible legislation, and so they are a privately funded group whose job is to write laws to benefit the corporations that fund them, and so they are behind a great deal of destructive legislation all over the country. They are funded by the Koch family. And that's who they are. So I mean, in a sense, in a way, it's sort of a piece of the rest of the stuff because it's privatizing the drafting of legislation. But it's more. I mean, that kind of stuff has happened for a long time. It's more the scale on which it's done. It's like the mass production of bad legislation, whereas it used to have to be handcrafted, one evil deal at a time. Now you've got factories turning it out.
And lately also, Occupy has been rallying against the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership, just like NAFTA, just like GATT, just like all of these trade deals, the Trans-Pacific Partnership gives away a great deal of what we used to think of as sovereign rights, and gives it away to corporations. Things like environmental protections, can be interpreted and are interpreted by these trade laws as restraints of trade. And if you sign an agreement that says that we're not going to have any restraints on trade, well, then your insistence that this company not pollute the river, that can be interpreted as a restraint of trade. And so that's what the Trans-Pacific Partnership does. But it does it just the same way that the GATT did it, or the WTO agreements, the NAFTA agreements, and all of the free trade agreements. They all have stuff like this in them, and that's really what they are.
So, in conclusion, all of this pulled together, we don't really have a democracy anymore, do we?
Well, the reason to do work like this is because you think that we do, and that you think that the reason. And you feel that if enough people know about these outrages, that there actually is something to do about it. I mean, we do have in this country orderly successions of power, and the goal, the work before us is to make sure that enough of our friends and neighbors and our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues know about these outrages, that they can find something to actually do about them, force people to take a stand on them, and actually try to force some change. The reason that these corporations go after the public commons is that we collectively are a very wealthy people. We have a lot of resources. We could have a lot of clout if we chose to have it, but instead we choose to tell our mayors and our governors and our senators, we choose to tell them that these governments of ours should just be passive customers of the financial industry. But instead, I think that we have the collective resources to demand that they be much more than that, so that they take an active part in making sure that they are not screwed. And so yes, I think that all of these things are blows against democracy. They are chipping away at the democratic ideals, but there are things to do, and I think that people ought to do them.
Thank you.